I am Mike Laird. I was diagnosed with low-grade appendiceal cancer in 2024, in April of 2024. Currently living in Dallas, Texas. I've got two little daughters that are 6 and 3. Yeah, I mean, really, to be honest, family is everything. I'd never heard of appendix cancer before. I guess let's start there. And so, really the first thing and the first sign was I had some pain down in kind of the lower right quadrant of my midsection. Being in the health and wellness space, you kind of have an understanding anatomically where things are. And so I thought it was just something along appendicitis. I did the jump test and things didn't feel fantastic. And so that for me, again, I think most males or males for the most part are kind of, tough it out, if you will, right? But this was different, right? I mean, I kind of pride myself on knowing my body pretty well. But this was different. And so, I told my wife, I said, hey, I'm going to run to the emergency room real quick. And so I took off to the emergency room. Well, I was actually urgent care is what I was looking for. It ended up being the emergency room. And they asked me, they said, oh, do you think it's appendicitis? Do we need to check it out? And I kind of said to them, I said, I don't think it's emergency room worthy just yet. So like, where's the urgent care? And they said, well, it's not here. It's across the other side of town. So, okay. So I took off across the other side of town, got to the urgent care. And at that point, I went to get out of the car and I went as white as this hat. I felt nauseous. I felt horrible. And I stumbled into the urgent care and they said, can we help you with something? I said, well, I have some pain down in the lower right quadrant. Think it might be appendicitis. And they told me, they said, well, see, the problem with that is we don't have any of the diagnostic tools to be able to test anything. So we're going to need to send you back to the emergency room, which is where I just came from. So I go screaming across the other end of town, back to the emergency room. And it was there. I was in quite a bit of pain at this point. The pain just continued to get worse and worse and worse over time. So they pumped me full of morphine. They stuck me in a CT scan and, basically came back and said, your appendix looks like it's about 6 times the size of what it should be. At that point, I started to panic a little bit. Didn't really know what was wrong. I was all kind of hopped up on morphine, like I said, and they said, we're going to transport you by ambulance to the hospital. We'll do your appendectomy tomorrow. I said, okay, awesome. But at that point, I'm also seeing dollar signs in my mind. So my thought is, I know how expensive it is to get in the back of this ambulance. Can I just drive myself? No, of course, we can't let you go. And at that point, we had 3 or 4 nurses kind of running this intervention of like, we can't let this guy leave. It's dangerous out there. And so, yeah, I, made my way to, the emergency room, to the hospital in the back of the ambulance. And, the surgeon came down, right before I was kind of wheeled off into surgery. And, something about me is I'm not really scared of a lot. But my 2 kind of greatest fears were going under and terminal illness such as cancer. And the surgeon came in and said, we're going to put you under. And by the way, your appendix is normal size, but there's a tumor that's growing on your appendix that looks like it had been there for about a year. And the problem with that is it's also ruptured. And so that kind of started that process. They went in, they did the appendectomy. I got into recovery. And they sent that tumor off, for a biopsy. And it came back malignant and away we went. Anybody who's been through, cancer or who has been a part of somebody's life, somebody that's close to them. I got a phone call on a Friday afternoon, after receiving my reports in my chart and looking at them and seeing all sorts of words that looked dangerous, right? And there was nobody there to answer any questions. So I ended up getting a call on Friday afternoon from the doctor who completed my appendectomy. And she said, look, there's no easy way to tell you this, but you have cancer. I don't really remember a lot after that. I kind of blacked out. I feel like I know I started to shake. I was terrified. You have every emotion and every thought runs through your mind of, I've got 2 kids. I've got a wife. I don't know if I'm going to see the next birthday. I don't know if I'm going to be here at Christmas. There was a lot of emotion. But once I kind of came to, it was the only thought I had was I'm going to beat this because I do not have a choice. What it took, I had no idea. I didn't know at the time. Like I said, I'd never heard of appendix cancer before. I didn't know how aggressive it was. I didn't know what stage it was. I didn't know how far it had spread because that tumor had ruptured. I had no idea. Was it in my colon? Was it on my liver? Was it in the pancreas? Was it what cavities was it? There was a lot of unknowns, and that they were questions that the surgeon that performed the appendectomy, she couldn't answer. She didn't know. She's not an oncologist. She didn't have any answers. So I was then left to sit the weekend wondering what's next. And, I was blessed enough to be, linked up with, in my opinion, the best oncologist here in Dallas. We continued a treatment plan from there. But it was a range of emotions. When I first met with the oncologist, he had obviously looked at the CT scan. He'd looked at all the reports that had come through from the biopsy, et cetera. And he essentially sat there and he told me, he said, I'm not prepared to tell you where we're going to go or what we're going to do until I have a 360-degree picture of what this is and what this looks like. And he wasn't prepared to make a call on the spot, which I appreciated, to be honest. I would rather have somebody who wants to be thorough about it. And so, from there, it was lots of blood work. It was another CT scan so he could have his team look at it and do any diagnosis that was needed. All of the biopsy, the tumor, the pieces of the tumor that they took to biopsy were sent across to his lab for his team to look at as well. From there, we completed a colonoscopy to make sure that the colon was all clear and nothing had made its way into the colon. And then from there, we did a diagnostic laparoscopy just so they could get a full picture of what was going on. And then from there, we made the decision that, it was HIPEC surgery from there, which essentially, without getting too graphic, and anybody who's been through, any time of, gastrointestinal cancer is probably familiar with HIPEC surgery. Yeah, essentially, clean you out, pump you full of chemo and zip you back up and, spend 5 or 6 days in the hospital. But, that was the best plan of attack for us. And that was his recommendation. And so, yeah, we went through with it on July 3rd of last year. Post HIPEC was a lot harder than what I thought it would be. You can read about it all you want. You can go to Google all you want, and you can look around at different stories, but nothing really prepares you for, what happens after. I mean, I grew up an athlete. I played collegiate sports. I played professional sports. I'm in the fitness industry. And, you hear a lot about this HIPEC surgery being performed on, older females, not younger males. So I'm kind of at the other end of the spectrum. And so, post-surgery, there were, I had drains coming out of everywhere. I had an incision that was from 3 inches below my belly button up to my sternum right down the center that all of a sudden just was the norm. And I had to get used to looking at it every day. I was, I guess, bombarded with nurses and doctors and blood work and, here, there, and everywhere. I had IVs hanging out of every, hand, every arm. I had, things going everywhere, cords going everywhere. And then probably 2 or 3 days. So I was in the ICU. I was in the ICU for a day, and then I was in the hospital for 4 or 5 days after that. And we got to about the 48-hour, 72-hour mark, and I quickly realized that my legs had stopped knowing how to work. Essentially, I could stand up, but as soon as I stood up, I'd get this wave of nausea. Now, obviously, having core surgery as well, like throwing up isn't exactly the friendliest feeling in the world. And so, I could stand up and that was it. I couldn't walk, I couldn't move. And so then there was a whole process of essentially like learning how to walk again, right? With a walker, I'm also sitting there as a former athlete thinking, hey, I'm a 36-year-old male at the time. Like, how has my body just forgot how to function? And so, yeah, that whole process. And then, 2 or 3 days later, now I'm dealing with the digestion things that people don't talk about either. Part of the HIPEC surgery, they removed my spleen, my gallbladder, and then half of my large intestine, had to reroute the small intestine. And so there's digestion things that come along with that. There's the overproduction of acid and a lot of those things aren't spoken about. It's just, hey, figure this out as you go. And, it's kind of what I mentioned before. And somebody asked me the other day, they said, what was the one thing that you learned the most through this whole situation? And I said, to be honest, everybody goes through hard things all the time, but until you're faced with a situation of, without sounding too dramatic, like life or death, having to kind of learn how to use your body again. I think, I learned that, the human body is incredibly capable of things if you give it a chance and you figure it out as you go. It's gradually become a little easier the further out I've got. Just kind of for context, I usually weigh anywhere from 185 to 190 pounds. Through this whole surgery, my first follow-up with my oncologist, I was down at 155. And he said to me, you have one job, don't lose any more weight. And, obviously I can't get back in the gym, right? I can't create any pressure in the core because you've got stitches and you said core surgery. And so, it was paying attention to what I was putting in my body at the time. And it wasn't, it was a lot of lower inflammatory foods. It was, really kind of dialing in my nutrition was number one. It was getting outside and getting in fresh air and walking. Some like the little things that you really thought didn't matter prior to this whole diagnosis were now the big things that really did matter. Like I can walk again. I have the ability to be around my friends and my family and to be able to socialize with people. And so it wasn't until the middle of October that I got clearance to actually go back and work out again. I work in the fitness space as well. So to be able to get back and lift up a weight again was outstanding. It was one of the best things that happened. And, have since, put back on about 20 pounds from that point. And really now it just becomes a little bit of a mental battle. There's still days that are, a little bit down, but, to be honest, the support system I have at home, my wife and my two kids, I don't have any words to be able to describe how incredible and a blessing they have been. My little girls are 6 and 3, so they really still don't understand what happened yet. They know dad was in the hospital for a little bit, but that's also another reason for me to keep going. And I think one of the things in just talking to people since the diagnosis in general is, the stronger the support system around you, the better. And so, it's doing all the things now to not just, maintain, but really improve my health dramatically as fast as I can, right? Before it was, eat clean, lift, do all the general types of things that we have to do. But now it's, paying attention to mental health and really trying to make an impact with survivors of whatever cancer it is, help them get their bodies back physically and mentally. And that's kind of where my business has started to go. And so, yeah, I guess, that's where things are at right now. But like I said, there's still days that are a mental grind. And, I've got a CT scan in February, and then I've got another one in July. And if you've been through it, you know the drill. And so I'm sure as it gets closer to those, there's going to be probably more tough days than not, with the thought of recurrence or, what happens if something comes back? What's the game plan? There's still a lot of unknowns until we really get a year or two out. But at the same time, I'll never forget walking through UT Southwestern in downtown Dallas and seeing people that were really going through it, that were, stage 4, 90 pounds soaking wet. And for me, I was diagnosed with low grade appendiceal, neoplasm. Like, I'm going to be okay. And so there's a little bit of perspective that comes along with it as well, right? It could be worse. Not minimizing anything that I've been through. But there's people out there, and you can just look at the people that you guys have spoken to. There's people going through it, and there's just been a real big perspective shift, if you will, here in the last handful of months. Right when I got home from the hospital, I realized that some things had changed a little bit mentally. One, I was glad to be home. I think that was one of the best things that could have happened. But at the same time, you're not able to do the things that you could do, a handful of days prior, right, before I went in for HIPEC surgery. And so, there was that mentality of, okay, we've got to go just day by day. And I even got to a point where I was breaking things down by the hour. Okay, how do you feel this hour? All right, I feel great. Awesome. We got through that. What did you do in that last hour that made you feel so good? Whether it was I found something on TV to watch. I mean, it was just the little things, right? It was, take a nap. And to be honest, it was the middle of summer. So it was sit outside in the heat and the fresh air because I'd spent 5 or 6 days or how many days in a hospital breathing reconditioned air and feeling horrendous. And so, it's just been a little bit of a day by day approach. I found the more that I keep things locked up, the worse it gets. I was never really a big talker until now, in terms of, feelings and emotions. And I think a lot of males probably go through that as well. And so, I feel like, expressing that in whatever capacity that is. But what I've also found to be valuable is, again, like things like this, or, if I'm working with, a client or whoever it is that, any question they ask, not being afraid to be vulnerable and answer it exactly and tell them exactly what happened and just be open about it. I mean, it's something that happened. It's something that I've got to live with forever. And, I try to take the approach now, and this has just kind of been a little bit more of a shift here recently that, this happened for me, not to me. And I think if I can have that train of thought, I think a lot of things become easier. You see opportunities that come up and you have a certain perspective on different things, especially, even going through this last holiday season that we just had, enjoying, the time that you have a little bit more. And I've come to the realization that after going through something like this, nothing else really matters, right? Like there's not a whole lot of things that I get stressed about. There's not a whole lot of things that either one of my kids can do that are going to frustrate me. Because at one point I received a phone call that, again, when I got that call, I had no idea whether I was going to be here in a handful of months or not. And so when you relive that every now and again, it's, it's a big mental hurdle. I was a personal training director at a large fitness company for about a decade. And, I had kind of branched out to do my own thing. I'm from Australia originally. I moved home for a year, came back to Texas, which, to be honest, when I kind of talk about this story, it's all weird that it happened the way that it did. The goal was to stay in Australia for a little bit. But as soon as we got back, it was within 6 months that this diagnosis happened. And it just happened to line up that we were in Texas with one of the world's best oncologists. So it all kind of lined up how it was supposed to. But when we got back to Texas, I shifted my business to where, I was working with just general population. I was, helping people get in shape, helping people change their lives. And we got to this diagnosis, and that's when my whole business model changed. Again, I look at this diagnosis as something that, that happened for me. And so now my entire goal and my entire focus is how can I make the biggest impact possible in the cancer community when it comes to not just physical health, but mental health, and helping people get back on their feet. Again, I dropped down to 150 pounds and had to rebuild it. Right. And so when it comes to, what can people do to help themselves, it's exactly what you said. It's, keep it basic, right? This is not hard. It can be relatively simple. The hardest thing is, getting through the unexpected, like the digestion issues. And, I change into a workout shirt and I see that incision line every day. And like, it's the little things that we go through that instead of looking at it as, okay, this makes everything harder, that incision is a part of my story. And so go, like I started off, I just went for a 10-minute walk and I just enjoyed being outside. I then got clearance to start getting back into some weight training. And so I started building up the joints and not training muscles, but training movement patterns. So my body continued to move in a 360-degree plane of motion. It wasn't going to do bicep curls and it wasn't going to do bench press. It was train my entire body. My training philosophy has changed a little bit. And so now it's more focused on total body regeneration, restructuring, you know, the way that my skeleton moves, and building strength from the core out, which is, you know, a little bit interesting to think about when you've got somebody that just went through core surgery. But if we can build it from the core out, you know, the results will speak for themselves. But then also just kind of, you know, I just like to call it, just be consistently average, right? Just do the little 1% things every single day, because after going through, whether it's HIPEC surgery or any type of surgery that's, you know, involved with any cancer case, there's going to be side effects that you don't see. And there's going to be people telling you, don't do too much, right? Don't go out there. Don't go too hard too soon. But, you know, for me, it was, I know my body better than anybody else on the planet, right? And I know when I'm ready and I know when I'm not. And when I'm ready, I'm going to go. But when my body's not ready, I'm also going to take a day to just sit and to just breathe and to recover properly, because you've been through something significant. It's just not, you don't just go from 0 back to 100. There's a process involved. And so, you know, what I've started to find with, you know, people that I speak to that are, you know, either survivors of you know, any type of cancer or are going through treatment at the moment, they're all hard on themselves with their physical shape and their mental health. And it's like, give yourself a break. Like, just take step by step and talk about it along the way. Like, it doesn't have to be perfect every day. It doesn't need to be an hour every day. It's a matter of moving your body to the best of your ability based off of where you're at right now. And that's what I tell everybody, because again, we all want to get back to being 100% as soon as possible. And we want to reverse things back to what they were before we got a phone call and we're told, okay, you've got cancer. There's this weird stigma to it that it's like, oh, now I'm going to play the victim. It's like, no. And I tell survivors this all the time. You've been through the hardest thing on the planet. There is nothing harder than going through any type of cancer. And so now, you know, what can we do? What can we do to make ourselves better? Well, we can just step one stone at a time until you get to whatever goal it is. Just like we're going to go and get one CT scan at a time until we're in remission. Through this whole process, I've learned to trust myself more than anything. You know, anything that, you know, again, anything that feels off, right? You know, it feels off. So go and get it checked. Don't be too big for the situation. I think my biggest piece of advice to people on the other side is enjoy every single second that you have. Because at any time, and people who are on the other end of this understand this concept, at any time you can get a phone call that changes everything for you. And you don't see things coming, and there's things that are outside of our control every day. But, you know, I view this thing in 3 different waves. I see a before, I see a during, and I see an after. And I think the mental and the physical approach to all 3 is a little bit different. And so, you know, yeah, I guess that's really the easiest way to sum it up. I've got 4 million things going around in my mind right now, but yeah, it's reliving some of this stuff. It just kind of puts you back into that place, and you know, just talking about it, and you know, looking at your body not just physically, but looking at it from a physical standpoint, a mental standpoint, a spiritual standpoint, a physiological standpoint. You know, and if we look at how the brain operates, you know, there's each lobe is going to take care of something different. So you don't just address the body as a whole, address every aspect of it. In whatever capacity you have the ability to. You don't need to do it all at one time. But, you know, I'm a big believer in, you know, meet yourself where you're at that point.